Ladies and gentlemen, if I can ask you to start taking your seats, we're about to get the next session started. I know the conversations at the bar are fantastic, but we're looking forward to having you join us in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get started in about 30 seconds time, so make your way back up, make sure that your coffees are in your hand, and we're going to start just about now. Oh, thank you very much. Let's check if my mic is on. Yes, it is. Welcome back. There's a party going on here about an hour and a half too early. We have drinks at 7, Frank. That's your timings. I'm sticking with them. We're going to send Frank right back to his chair. Coffees and water for now. 7 o'clock is when we start the party. But welcome back. Thank you for bringing your coffees upstairs. And we're starting the session a few minutes late, but it's a long one and it's a good one. So never too late to get started. We've been buzzing. Thank you very much for being so active as conversationalists through the entire day and the last session. And again, holding you to this for this session as well. We're talking about the transformative power of capital. I think the last session indicated to us this is the way we're going. We need the metrics, we need the systems in place, not just for values, but also when it comes to sustainable finance. I know a lot of folks believe that we're heading in the right way, so are we? It's been topic du jour. I know a lot of people were very excited when Mark Carney's GFANZ announcement happened, but again, we've read enough stories in the last couple of weeks to know that program in itself has plenty of holes as well. So how do we close those holes to make sure we're going down the right way for sustainable finance? There's plenty of money committed. How do we hold them accountable to make sure that money goes in the right direction? Why does it matter? How do we close the North-South divide? And how do we get you involved? First up, I'm going to introduce our panelists who are exceptional in their own right. Patricia Espinoza became the face of, the glue that binds, and the woman who could make almost 200 countries listen, whether they liked it or not, as Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC in 2016. She's had pretty good practice at making people listen as the Minister of Foreign Affairs at Mexico, lifetime of experience at the highest levels of international relations. And METTLER joins us as well. She is at Breakthrough Energy and serves as Vice President for Europe, working with European partners. She works on clean tech, of course, and a lot of innovation that goes into investments in that particular direction. If you know her and you're part of that whole Brussels circle, you know why she's so critical to this. She was Director General at the European Commission, where she ran the Internal Strategy Department and also was the Executive Director and co-founder of the Lisbon Council. So let's get them up on stage. Before I introduce to you Bill Thomas, please take your seat. Bill Thomas is Global Chairman and CEO of KPMG International. He joins us virtually. Bill was previously Chairman of KPMG Americas, before that CEO and Senior Partner of KPMG in Canada, and in all of his roles at KPMG and beyond, he's particularly committed to lifelong learning and the work that KPMG does with not-for-profit organizations to promote and enable learning for all, especially important in the S that we talk in ESG. So let's remember this conversation's open to everyone as usual, so do catch my eye if you want to make a comment or raise a question. And I'm going to start off with asking all of you, raise your hands if you got very excited when the GFANZ announcement was made in November. Who got excited? Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. $130 trillion committed to sustainable development. How many of you were cynical right from the get-go? Raise your hands. Don't be shy, this is an open forum. Okay. And then all of those who never raised their hands were completely undecided. So it's kind of split even. So I'm going to leave it to all of you to start me off with your key thoughts on where we are when it comes to capital being at one of the core parts of transforming us to where we want to go. Patricia, I'm going to start off with you. Give us your key thoughts, and then we can pick up the conversation from there.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the BMW Foundation for making this conversation possible, which is really the kind of conversation that we need to have this year, especially after we had a very productive conference in Glasgow, where we heard these announcements, where we managed to keep the 1.5-degree goal alive, but only just. And this is why the conversations are really so important. I don't want to repeat or tell you what you already know, which is the gravity of the emergency, the costs, not only economic, the human cost that we are seeing. And the human cost, the fact is that it is not only about people dying, but also the instability. This, the theme of the Munich Security Conference, which is this helplessness, this sense of helplessness, the fact that we see values are changing and people don't know what to believe in anymore. So all of this really has to be taken into account when we are talking about climate change. And the fact is that very important decisions need to be made this year. this year, and here I want to put into perspective the two milestones that we have going forward. 2030, minus 45% emissions. According to the plans that were presented at the conference, we are at plus 16%. So how are we going to go from plus 16% to minus 45 in the coming 8 years? The other point is 2050, climate neutrality by 2050. How many of the plans, the few plans, by the way, still, that we have received regarding 2050 are already contemplating immediate actions? Very few. It's like, it's easier to make plans for 2050 without saying exactly how we're going to move on the next day. But this is what we need to do, because this is the decisive decade, and this is the moment where we need to have transformative decisions. I would put emphasis on that. And we don't have time. We need to have those transformative decisions in the next 2 years at the most. We know that a lot of the transformations that need to happen cannot happen from one day to the next. And this is why the decisions need to be taken as soon as possible. Now, your role, the role of capital, the role of the investors, it's absolutely crucial. Science guides the trajectory of decisions that we need to take. But really, capital will drive those transformations. And this is where you have such an important role to play. And I want to thank you for being here, for your interest, for your commitment. The first point I would make in that regard is the fact that there needs to be a very interdependent relationship between policymakers and the investment sector. And the governments need, yes, they need to provide the enabling environments. They need to provide clarity to investors. And this is why the decisions in the framework of the COP, of the conference, and in the framework of the intergovernmental process altogether are so important to give clarity to investment, to give clarity to the financial sector. This is why the Article 6 on carbon markets was so important. It was so difficult. Now, we took 6 years to get there. We cannot continue to move at that pace. We also need to see the fulfillment of commitments that were made until now, and one of them is the 100 billion. And I would say that you, in your role as investors, you may be able to influence decision makers in your countries to really move forward with this. We know that the transformation is not about 100 billion. And by the way, some of the more vulnerable countries have already been very open in saying, look, for us, 100 billion is not really the most important part. For us, what is important is to be able to access finance for recovery and reconstruction after we have had a severe weather event. So, but why are these 100 billion still important? Because they need to build trust. Trust in the multilateral system, trust in the fact that whatever is decided under the Paris Agreement, under our system, it will be done. Second, we need investors to divest from high-emitting and especially fossil fuel and deforestation portfolios. And we have seen even in the last days some reports pointing to the fact that there is still too much money going into fossil fuel. That needs to change. That really needs to change. The energy crisis crisis that we are seeing now here in Europe and other countries in the north is creating the wrong incentives. We need to change that, and we need to be clear that we are talking about a scenario where it is about all of our survival, all of our business, all of our societies. It's not an issue about some that will be hit. We know that the reality is the effects are being felt every day. We know they will increase. We don't know exactly when, but we know eventually it is very much likely that we are also hit directly. Let me just go to the 3 points that I would like to leave with you on what you can do, how you can contribute. First, to take actions to credibly and verifiably reduce your emissions and to decarbonize your portfolios. Second, to work with governments to drive climate ambition forward and to develop immediate transition plans. Immediate. I want to underline the word immediate, because plans until now, really, frankly, especially in the UN system, we're talking about, a decade, we're talking about 2 decades. This is just not possible. And then third, to apply a climate lens in all decision making, at the personal level, in your everyday life, but also in the way you are driving your business, in the way that you are influencing others. You are all very influential personalities. That influence we really need. So I don't want to go on much longer, because we really want to have this interaction. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for setting the stage for us, Patricia, because that brings up Anne, and lay out the grounds of how you're looking at the problems that Patricia has laid out.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your remarks, and thank you for inviting me. Very pleased to be here. In preparing for this, and you already said it in your introduction, I have more than 2 decades of experience in public policy, and so I was sort of reflecting of what I had learned and what are some of my key takeaways. And what I really have to say, it doesn't matter how well designed a policy is or how many pleas one makes. If policymakers don't put their money where their mouths are, then policies will only ever amount to wishful thinking. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but it really, is one of my key takeaways. So, and I saw this perhaps most vividly for those who are old enough will still remember the EU's Lisbon Agenda. I'm looking at you, Marcello, here. So the Lisbon Agenda was, of course, the EU's plan to become the most knowledge-based economy in the world by 2020. But it was frankly delusional, and I say it very purposefully. It was delusional to think that you're going to be building the world's most competitive knowledge-based economy when agricultural subsidies are, and by the way, continue to be, your single biggest budget priority. So in the case of reaching net zero emissions, I would say that the challenge is actually even more pronounced. It's not just that we need to mobilize capital. I mean, we broadly speaking, we know that. And we need to put our money where our mouth is. But it's that success is really intrinsically linked with a step change in the development and deployment, and I emphasize deployment of technological innovation, not just at home, but across the globe in a way we have never seen it before. And that's a very tall order. In a nutshell, that's what I'm working on. So that's why Breakthrough Energy focuses really sort of on the frontier of clean energy innovation. And I emphasize frontier because, of course, we have great technologies already, whether that's wind, offshore, including offshore wind and solar, but these are now mature technologies, and we are convinced that we need sort of a new generation of clean technologies if we want to really make headway. So combined with massive emissions reductions, and I think you were absolutely right on that, that's the only thing that's really going to get us to net zero. And here I oftentimes like to cite the International Energy Agency and its net zero roadmap, which I'm sure you have all read, but in a nutshell, up to 50% of the additional emission reductions that will be needed to get us to net zero by the year 2050 will have to come from technologies that are today in prototype or demonstration phase. I repeat, today in prototype or demonstration phase. And that's why at Breakthrough Energy, we are working to bring that next generation of technologies really to the forefront. And here we work across the innovation cycle, because it's really important to understand, yes, we need the R&D, and I'll be the first one to say that, but just the R&D is not enough. And that's why we have different programs. We have Breakthrough Energy Fellows, which essentially allows very talented scientists to take their idea out of a lab and into an environment where they can demonstrate, they can test their hypothesis. And this, I need to tell you, as someone who comes out of digital tech, where pretty much all you need is an advanced computer, in clean energy innovation, this costs a lot of money. You may need to have to build a small plant. You may really have to invest in something. And this is why we have Breakthrough Energy Fellows, to allow those ideas to go from a lab environment into an environment where they can be validated, can be tested. We also have Breakthrough Energy Ventures. This is a $2 billion venture fund that has now invested over 80 companies across 4 continents. And here, it's very interesting because the investment philosophy for Breakthrough Energy Ventures is not the return on investment, which is usually what guides investment, but is the potential climate impact. So we invest in companies that we believe can develop technologies that can reduce CO2 emissions by 0.5 gigaton. So it's very, I mean, that's a lot. So this is the investment philosophy. And here I should maybe mention, not everyone knows, I work for Bill Gates. And he purposefully put the venture fund together with other high net worth individuals, because these are people who can essentially lose their money. Because a lot of these ideas that are in these companies will not work out, and we know that. But nonetheless, if you want a breakthrough, if you want a moonshot, if you want an earth shot, it's probably going to come out of one of these companies. And then, and this is what I really want to talk about, is our flagship program, which is called Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. So Catalyst was set up essentially to help solve the funding gap that exists for proven first-of-a-kind climate technology projects, first of a kind, and accelerate their adoption and increase their bankability. So essentially what you can think about is these are technologies that already exist today, but these are very high-risk technologies. There's not really a market yet. And so investors, despite the fact that we always talk about some of these technologies, especially green hydrogen, investors are still shy to make the necessary investments. So because the truth is that although, as I just said, we talk about these technologies, whether that's green hydrogen, long-duration energy storage, or direct air capture, and even, I mean, I'm sure all of you follow this, there are many announcements about projects that will be built, or, you know, even there are some prototypes, there are some demonstration projects. These projects are far away from scaling the way we once scaled solar, the way we once scaled wind, including offshore wind, which, by the way, started in the early 1980s. It takes 40 years for these technologies to go from the R&D stage into a time when they are actually cost competitive. 40 years, we don't have that. So essentially, we want to scale these technologies that already exist today much faster than they otherwise would. And as someone, I was at an interesting session yesterday where an unnamed CEO, but a CEO of a very important energy company, said, there still is not a business case for sustainability. But he wants, because these markets don't exist. This is what you have to understand. These markets for these technologies don't yet exist. So this is why we should be spending a lot of time thinking about it. And that's, by the way, why Catalyst, Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, teams up with governments and with institutions. So we have, and this is probably most relevant in the context here, we concluded an agreement with the European Commission on Catalyst that we will jointly mobilize up to $1 billion, so around 840 million euros for these kind of projects and technologies that I just spoke about. But we also have major agreements with the US, with the UK government, and also with multilateral bodies such as Mission Innovation. I'll wrap up in a minute. But in a nutshell, we use blended finance to provide last-minute funding to actually help these projects get off the ground more quickly than they otherwise would. Speed is important here. We deploy low-cost capital to reduce the financing costs. It costs a lot of money to finance these projects because they are so risky. And then we attract market investment by improving the project economics and reducing the risk. And we organize buyers that are willing to pay a premium to create these new markets. A company that today buys green steel will pay more. A company that today buys sustainable aviation fuels will pay more. Right now, we have no incentive for these companies to be doing the right things, and this is what Catalyst wants to change, because without actually generating the demand and incentivizing the use of these clean technologies, I can assure you we will not get to net zero. So, and that's precisely why I always call for a new generation of public-private partnership. So obviously we need the public sector, we need the private sector. No one can do that alone. But since we're speaking here at the BMW Foundation, I just want to say I think the philanthropy has an important role to play here as well. A lot of money has gone into climate philanthropy. I am personally convinced a lot of that money needs to become much more operational. Yes, we need awareness. Yes, we need to do all of that. But if more of that money went into the development of these technologies, we could decarbonize much faster than we currently can. So I'm just throwing that out here maybe as one idea. And this will conclude my remarks. But one thing another thing that I learned about public policy is climate is really tough because there is a collective action problem that is so inherent in it, yeah? Because even if one geography acts, another one may not. So we need to think about how do we make this happen? How do we create these markets? How do we bring everyone along? And this is really a tall order, and that's why all of the people who believe in this and who share that sentiment, let's have that conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
And thank you for that perspective, Bill. Last but not the least, give us the place you're coming from, because you spend a lifetime looking at various clients across various geographies. Where are you at now?
Well, let me just say thanks, Maitri, to you for hosting this, and it's a real privilege. And the beauty of doing this virtually is you get to take notes on both Patricia and Anne's opening comments. So I feel very privileged to do that. But look, I think this is a really important topic, and it's great to be here, albeit virtually. And I do think that we've already hit on a few of the key ideas, which is, really how do we finance solutions to build a sustainable future? And it sounds really simple. And I'll share you some of my thoughts and maybe a little bit of the thoughts of our firm. But, this is a huge task. And already Patricia and Anne have outlined the significance of the challenge. And I will say, I'm sure over the last couple of days, people have focused on sort of the things we need to do. And Anne just alluded to the fact that, we should take stock and say, look, there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot that's been accomplished, but it's not fast enough and it's not scalable. And so while we've come a long way, we don't have 40 years, as Anne just described. So we do need to scale, we do need to deploy things faster, and we need to meet the challenges that society faces. And I think at the same time, and I think this was evident in Patricia's comments, you know, we need to ensure that we do this in a way where the whole world can access these innovations, not a select few. And then look, nothing's going to come for free, and we need to direct capital to do this. And as Patricia said, if we're going to do that, we need to get everybody involved. And the financing and investing side of it is so critical. And look, I'm a firm believer, and the world has moved mountains in the last 24 months, that business has a responsibility to help shape a more sustainable future. It has to. But right now, from my perspective, there's kind of a few gaps, an information gap for sure, that's holding things back. And investors definitely need better information. And I think, as both Anne and Patricia have said, there's too much risk. I mean, that's true for jump-starting a project in an emerging market, but it's just as true for global stock markets today. I mean, you need comparable, trusted information that's transparent in order for people to act on it. And that's why KPMG, certainly together with the Big Four, this is not a competitive set, and the WEF, you know, and some of the largest companies in the world, we've worked to really try and make sure there's a corporate voice on the creation of sustainable metrics. Those metrics that we put out, they will be sort of embedded into the talks and the evaluations being taking place right now at the ISSB, which was a huge push in the right direction coming out of COP. And look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whose metrics are right. What it matters is that we have a consistent set of sustainability metrics that people can sort of get behind, and most importantly, change both the speed and the nature of the behavior. And you cannot underestimate how significant that is. This needs to be done in a just way, in a fair way that sort of creates the right conditions for emerging markets, and particularly, I think, those that are most vulnerable, so that they're able to invest in the projects. We spent a lot of time working. I'm sure we'll talk over the next hour on this. And that's going to take the kind of connectivity and collaboration that Patricia referenced between the MDBs, the governments, private sector, everybody sort of working together to help de-risk those investments. So the final note for me, maybe, Maitri, is to say, look, it's not just the investment community that's looking for business. It's every person out there, our clients, consumers, employees, owners, citizens, every stakeholder. They're not just expecting, they're demanding more from business, because the problems that we face are global in scope, as you rightly describe, and they're existential in threat. And if we don't focus the capital markets on long-term value creation and the integration of ESG metrics into financial reporting, while that will help, that's not going to get us to where we need to go. We've got to work together in more rapid and more holistic ways to achieve that. So look, I feel out of my depth in the presence of Anne and Patricia. I'll do my best to keep up to speed, but I very much appreciate the chance to be here today with all of you, and I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion.
I think everyone in this room has imposter syndrome. Thank you for that, Bill. Let's pick up on that conversation, because Bill brings up a very valid point. All of you did. So Patricia, I'm going to put this to you. When a lot of the more vulnerable countries left Glasgow, they left disappointed. They left feeling a little bit adrift, because they didn't get the money they were promised for years. They were told they were going to get it. Sustainable finance was promised, a lot of pledges were made, but they still left relatively cynical, saying, we'll see what happens. That was one answer that we got. We also got a number of companies saying, we want to make the difference. We got institutional investors saying, we want to make a difference. When you go out and look at the people who are talking to you about the vulnerabilities that they face, do you see them also talking to you about the innovations that they're doing, leapfrogging, not waiting for the West, because the money never came, so we better take care of our own problems? Do you see those innovations happening in small ways in the global South, in the Pacific Islands, in emerging markets?
Well, let
Or are they waiting for the white horse from the west?
No, they are not waiting. And actually, I had the fantastic privilege of being invited to visit Tuvalu. And that has been one of the most moving visits I have done in my professional career. I went to the school to be with some children during their classes, just watching those children, different ages, in a classroom with 38 degrees, 150% humidity, of course, no air conditioning, nothing, and all sitting there and learning, and it was really, really moving. And then the conversation with them about climate change. So I said, listen, do you know what is climate change? Oh yes, when the water comes. So it was really very, very, very striking to me to see how these small children were, you know, at that early age, concerned about this, and very conscious about the fact that this is about their own existence. In that trip, I visited some of the programs that they were doing in the island about sustainable agriculture. Imagine the carbon footprint that they have for everything they consume. So there was really a lot of effort, and I have to say, with really almost so little funding that it doesn't even you know count. You almost don't see it. Their big at that time a huge challenge was to really go away from their dependency from diesel for electricity. Imagine already the diesel has such a high carbon footprint, then getting it with a ship coming all the way down to Tuvalu. It's just, and not finding the capital to be able to build their solar installations, wind installations, other types of sources of energy. Literally, not finding a way of getting that kind of support. So they are doing what they can. More recently, and here I want to highlight another very important example. The Maldives, they have done a lot of efforts. The minister of the Maldives, a very, very bright young woman, is really pushing forward and telling me, you know, we spent 5 years until we have the resources approved from let's say the Green Climate Fund or other sources. By that time, the communities that initially had proposed this project, they need something else because the situation has changed. So they are not waiting, but it is a fact that the investment in, as Anne was saying, in this really massive deployment of these technologies is absolutely crucial. And there, in many cases, yes, you cannot make a big market of Tuvalu. You cannot make a big market from the Maldives or many other, but this is really part of the problem, and it is a question of justice. Bill was mentioning also the fact that this transition needs to be just. Yes, it needs to be just, it needs to be fair. I refer to Glasgow's outcomes as productive. I don't refer to it as a success. Why? Because we didn't manage to really get to the point where we can be confident we have it within our reach.
I'll continue the conversation, but if anyone has a comment or a question, please do grab my attention. Just to flip this, 1 second, because I'm going to finish this question and then come right back to you. The question for both Bill and for Anne then comes to the fact that we saw leapfrogging in emerging markets when it came to mobile and banking. We didn't need to create a massive market. We didn't need to spend billions to create it. They decided they needed it. They decided that the S part of their life required it, and they created it. This is at a time when we were still calling them frontier markets, and some people still refer to them as frontier markets. Do we really think that countries that are at the vulnerable position that many are, or emerging markets in Africa and Asia and Latin America, are going to wait for innovations to lose some of their green premiums, or are they going to leapfrog us in Europe and the US, where we're still thinking, we have a market, now we need to change it. They don't have that market. They could just leapfrog this. Anne?
That's an interesting question. What I have learned, and I do come out of digital tech, and I do know what you're talking about when it comes to sort of mobile telephony, when it comes to online banking, where indeed those countries did a leapfrog. This is much more difficult in clean technologies because the upfront investment that you need is massive. There is no cheap way to leapfrog to anything. So what I want to say, also in response to the previous question and very good answer, is perhaps we need to think of a new division of labor where the advanced and rich countries invest in the R&D, make the massive investment that is needed at the early stage, at the inception of a new technology. But then we look at how do we build innovation partnerships and see how can we work with others so that they, A, can benefit, by the way, also economically, but can help us scale and deploy the technology much faster than otherwise would. I would encourage you to learn about a very good project that the Germans are doing, H2 Global, where they are looking, they essentially created a foundation to work on green hydrogen and are working with countries like Morocco in actually producing the green hydrogen. In fairness, a lot of that will be coming back to Germany, but also at an economic benefit of Morocco, which will then build up that capability and that knowledge and that base in the country. That's another thing I would say. I mean, we're speaking here in the margins of the Munich Security Conference. I think that new world may look very different. Countries like Chile and Morocco may be much more important than they are today in sort of the global energy system. So we need to look at the places that have abundant and cheap renewable energy, because this is now the foundation on which new technologies such as green hydrogen, such as green steel, green cement, low carbon fertilizers will be built. So the whole geography may change in very exciting ways, and it may empower countries that today you wouldn't think of as an energy sort of leader. So there's a lot of potential here, but we need to do it together. And that's why I am a big advocate of not just talking about knowledge and technology transfer from the advanced economies into other countries and geographies, but really innovation partnership, understanding how we are mutually dependent on one another to not only develop these technologies, but deploy them, because any technologies that just develop but not deployed is useless. I mean, almost useless. So let's think about this, the scaling, the speed, creating these new markets. That's essentially what is needed now.
Bill?
Yeah, Maitri, I'll give you a really quick answer. This is way harder, and the reason why is I think basic human nature. When you talk about digital, or you talk about the sort of broadband and things like that, you're into a scenario where you are improving sort of demonstrably the quality of life for individuals. In some case, those advancements are survival versus not. So the pull is enormous, and therefore the chance of success is huge. Much of what we're talking about here, you have portions of the population around the world that arguably still debate whether it's an issue. I mean, our kids will not debate that, but many of our generation will. And until you reach that tipping point where the pull is much more significant than it is today, this is going to be a lot harder. It's because the push is way harder than the pull on efforts like this.
We have.
Can I just add
please
something
do,
to
please
this?
do.
What makes this genuinely difficult is that you're absolutely right, that what drives innovation usually is a pull. It's a better product, it's cheaper, it's just, you want to have it. Here, whether you fly an airplane that's flying with sustainable aviation fuels or kerosene is no palpable difference to you. And it makes it genuinely difficult to get this sort of off the ground. Whether you drive a car that's made with green steel versus traditional steel is probably not a huge difference to you. And innovation without a palpable difference in the product is exceedingly difficult. And this is why governments need to step in and really give the incentives to buy these products. This is, by the way, what John Kerry is doing with the First Movers Coalition, at least starting to organize companies to say, we're making the right choice even if we're paying a higher price. But we need a lot more than this, I mean, this is just the beginning.
Question from Marcello. We've got one in the front row there, and then the third and the fourth. So let's start from the front here and then go to the side. First question.
Thank you very much.
Please do introduce yourself.
Marcello Palazzi, B Corps, Now Foundation, and a few others. But I'm also a member of the Swedish Global Challenges Foundation that created the Exponential Roadmap. If anyone wants to see Exponential Roadmap, it's actually for businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, how to quickly get to climate neutral. It's very interesting. It's a non-profit run out of Sweden. My comment and question, as Anne knows, I love her work. Anne is fantastic. But we all know, we read it the other day in The Guardian, $829 billion or euros still being funded, going into the fossil fuel industry. Now, I know another philanthropist, Andre Hoffman, he's working on the $17 trillion recovery funds that governments have given out in the world in the last 2 years. How do we get the money to be as green as possible? So the question to Anne is, with someone like Bill Gates, maybe you're already doing this. You've got to go after this 829 billion because that's the money you need to be able to. And of course, it's a bit like what Ronald Cohen did in the UK, some 10 years ago, get this dormant accounts in banks, create big society capital. We need something like that, really exponential. And I think, so Bill Gates could pull it off.
Could Bill pull it off? Bill Thomas, would you pull it off?
I don't know. I mean, these are very deeply ingrained problems, and I've heard it now several times here, also at the conference. The fossil fuel interests are extremely well organized, and they're extremely powerful. My worry is, I mean, we are going now after sort of the fossil fuel companies in the West or in the advanced economies. But now all they're doing is divesting their dirty assets, and they're being bought by private companies that are not subject to the same scrutiny that, for instance, a listed company is. So I mean, we're not really doing anything about the problem. So there is, I mean, what would help? I mean, what I would advocate is at least stop subsidizing that stuff. I mean, that is crazy. We need to really have sort of, an overview of what is all subsidized here. Let me say, I mean, I think that what the EU just put out in terms of the taxonomy, I know it was controversial, that gas and that nuclear in there, but at least start to define, what should we be investing in and what deserves sort of, an incentive. And then perhaps things will slowly change. So, I mean, honestly, looking at just sort of a really wealthy, powerful person and hoping that they can help is not a good strategy. So, I think we need much more than that. And let's start by just stop subsidizing it. That would already be, a really big step.
stop subsidizing and go after some deep pockets, Patricia? And then we have to go for the break.
Yeah.
Yep.
One comment on that particular point about the subsidies of fossil fuels and the fact that we were able to have that mentioned, even if it was subject to a last-minute negotiation and what we all know. But the fact is that the decision to, at the highest level, to eliminate subsidies to fossil fuels has been taken over 10 years ago. And this is what we cannot continue to allow to happen. That we have, the G20 took that decision, it has been repeated and repeated and repeated, and it just does not happen. Now, I don't think that I think we also need to go into a very serious conversation on how do we do this transition, because we know that we cannot just shut fossil fuels from one day to the next. Okay, how do we do this transition? And how can we do it fast? One comment I wanted to make earlier also, you know, in some places in the world, actually renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. So this is already happening in many places in the world, by the way. So this is already happening. It's not, it doesn't mean, I don't think we should now assume that everything that is green and clean is more expensive, or it implies a bigger cost. So I think this is also something that we need to start to change. To your point, Anne, about the fact that consumers, if they don't see a big difference directly, yes, I think I agree with that. With my generation and maybe some others, but the youth, they are making a difference. For them, it is really becoming a different thing. I remember being young, having a car was a status signal. For the youth now, at least what I see in many places, even from good economically good positioned families, they don't want a car. They don't want a car. Their concept of well-being and what they aspire to is different. So I think this is something that we need to incorporate in the conversation. And yes, it is very difficult to have all of that in these conversations and in government decision making. And absolutely, fully agree, it has to be governments working together with the private sector.
We have a question in the front. I think we have a mic ready. Please do introduce yourself.
Good evening. Thank you so much for these interesting remarks. My name is Johannes Pockland. I work for Citigroup. I wouldn't have expected that in a panel on the transformative power of capital, the banking sector is mentioned 45 minutes in, and when it's mentioned in relation to mobile payments. Love the forward look on technologies and deploying innovation, but we do have a very fossil fuel-heavy sector that needs transforming. We're not going to be able to close those factories and throw the keys away, at least not in Western democracies that depend on that benefit, and that economic benefit and well-being. So maybe a remark rather than the question, don't forget the banking sector. And this continent is 80% bank financed. Just because I work for a bank, I don't think that's a good idea. So we want to get the transformation right. That means we need to think much more about building a capital market where we don't have one. And we don't have one in Europe, and we certainly don't have one in many emerging market economies. And that's connected to a number of points. Financial literacy. Your average student in Europe graduates from college not being able to tell you the difference between a stock and a bond. How's that person going to become an interested investor that thinks strategically about putting their money into green technologies, right? So I apologize for making a short statement rather than a question, but I just wanted to share that impression.
I would love for you to continue that statement if you could. What commitment at this point has Citigroup made to not fund or finance fossil fuel companies?
Very timely question, and we didn't talk about this before. So, Citi announced in late January last month.
Is it a commitment, a pledge, or is it actually going to be in stone?
It is
the other question.
It is a commitment. The top sort of the headline of which is 2050 net zero, but it includes 2030 milestones, and. Frankly, it will involve very, very difficult conversations with many very valued clients, and it will mean exiting certain industries. And it is a message that sells very differently here than it does in our home market. That is ultimately the base for the firm's profitability. So it's not to complain, but it is a conversation to have had with clients, and it's not always an easy conversation, right?
Bill, this is an interesting point that he brings up because Citi's also set a bit of a trend when it comes to tobacco, when it comes to guns. Is this what we need? The financial institutions take what a previous session was being described as the North Star, where the company comes up with a plan or a bank comes up with a plan and then sticks to it because that's the guiding value principle. And that then defines what they consider sustainable or not.
Yeah,
Since we don't have a definition yet.
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation because I think this question is coming up around the world like over and over again every day for every significant business, and certainly Johannes makes the point, and I do think that to a little bit to Anne's point, the funding of businesses in sort of a binary look at this, where it's you're either green and good or not green and bad. That is one, not going to achieve what we want to achieve because it won't lead to a just transition. And secondly, you're into a scenario where the very organizations that are going to be at the heart of the solution are some of the companies that you're talking about, and you need to be able to differentiate. You can't just move the problem to a different scenario. But I want to come back, Maithrini, if I can, like on Johannes' point, because he's got a good one. Like money, and more money is what's needed to solve some of this. If you think about, estimates being sort of 6.9 trillion each year needed to address the scale and size and the speed of what we're talking about, there is no way that governments and multilateral development banks and the like can handle that in and of themselves. The private sector, the banks, the asset managers, etc., organizations like mine, they're going to have at their disposal 145 trillion by 2025. So from my perspective, if we want to address this challenge, and it's been said several times already, we need to embrace everybody, and the private capital that I think is at stake here has to sort of come to the party, and that's going to get into conversations, which I'm sure you've had over the last couple of days. We can go there if we want to today, around risk and the alignment of risk appetite versus risk of a project. But the concept of public-private partnerships and private capital, there's no solution to this without significant sort of investment being made by the private sector here, together with the historical ways in which projects are being invested behind.
Exactly. So even if I didn't explicitly, it's a good comment you made, even though I didn't explicitly spoke about the banking sector, implicitly I did, because I spoke about return on investment, risk aversion. I spoke about how difficult it is to get these projects off the ground. It's precisely because our traditional paradigm for investing is rooted in sort of the post-war industrial age. It's not fit for what is needed now. And that's not the banking sector's fault per se, it's just how we do things. And this is why paying attention to why is there so much risk aversion? Because there is a risk in these projects. Let's face it, technologies that are not yet 100% proven are a big investment risk. This is why I brought up Breakthrough Energy Catalyst and the last mile financing, because we work with project developers and you can put the project together, but usually there's just this little bit on top that is unacceptable risk to traditional banking institutions. And this is where we come in and say, we will deploy philanthropic capital to make up for that risk, because we acknowledge the risk, and we will bring you the demand. We will bring you the airline that's going to commit to 10 years of buying that stuff. And that makes it less, risky for you. So this is how we need to work together. Change the incentives. Really make that difference so that we can do things in a more agile, faster, quicker way. Because we all agree something needs to happen, but it all needs to become much more operational now on who does what.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say? This is the kind of conversation we need to have.
I think breaking out of the silos comes back to it. We've got one question, and then one question. If you can do all three questions at one go, and then we'll get them to answer it. So the gentleman at the back first, please. He raised his hand ages ago.
Yeah, no, I want to touch on this point that Anne is emphasizing the need for technological innovation, and which then would require massive capital investment and so on. Of course this is needed. Of course we need innovation. Of course we have to come up with new things. But guess what? There is a lot of not first movers, but last movers that need so much capital. There's so much technology that is out there that needs very little investment to be deployed at scale. For instance, the land use sector, be it kind of rice methane in Asia, be it kind of cattle intensification in South America, be it reducing deforestation related to agriculture, requires investment at landscape level, consequently not equity finance, but debt finance at low cost so that you can ask people to do different things. So we need technological innovation, but for this low-hanging fruit, you need financial innovation.
Could you introduce yourself, because they might not know.
Pedro Moracosta from a company trying to do that. It's called Sustainable Investment Management, among other things.
Question here, and then question in front, and then we'll take all three together.
Yeah, thank you very much for the discussion. I think that's very insightful. So my name is Andreas Glunz. I'm actually also working at KPMG in Germany. And I just would like to broaden a little bit the discussion, because I think we are talking a lot about energy industry, we're talking a lot about finance industry, but we're not talking about all the other industries which are also impacted, because it's a broad topic for all industries. And my question is, aren't there a lot of business opportunities for transforming the business model, which also offer a lot of chances? So there will be companies that will be winners, there will be companies that will be losers. But shouldn't we concentrate in our discussion not more about the winners and about the chances that are also possible for companies who are investing now?
And we've got a third one in the front. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Katie Hill from the B Corp movement. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points, one about the financial innovation, and another one was about the speed of change. So on the financial innovation, I wonder whether we do actually have all these products. We've done some amazing loans, which have been inversely related to the impacts that's been created. The cost of capital comes down. The Gavi example with this wonderful blended finance where you have pyramids of different sorts of investors at different levels. So have we got it there? We're just not using it imaginatively, is one question. The second one was about Shell, who were on a platform, sorry to pick them out, but they're a good example. They were on a platform just before Glasgow saying, we're committed to the renewables, but we need time to transition. So my question is, how long do they really need? And are we talking 5 years? I mean, they've been doing this for ages. We've all known the problem. At what point do we say you had time, you've got to stop drilling now? I just don't know what time is reasonable. You said it can't be switched on and off, but, Norway has 100% of their energy totally renewable now. Why is it so slow?
So we have three questions. Who wants to take what?
I can start with the first one on essentially the low-tech solution. I think that's a very good point. It's not what I work on. Here, I think we need to have a discussion about voluntary carbon markets, which I believe you probably know, are in a transition because of the Mark Carney task force that started that conversation. And I would like to see more of the voluntary carbon market and the offsets that companies are buying to go into these kind of projects. So it's a very good point, very valid. It's just, I don't work on it, so I don't speak about it.
Patricia.
Yeah, let me also take that point. Yes, absolutely. And the truth is that we need to continue to invest in technological innovation, and we know, and we are really hopeful. Why? Because in the past, humanity has been able to make just amazing progress through technological innovation in all different sectors. So we're hopeful that will happen. Now, we don't have the time to wait for the innovation to happen and then to be able to be at the stage that it can be massively deployed. So therefore, we need to work while we are here and now in all the different sectors that today we need to address. So there are quite a number of technologies. You're absolutely right in the area of land use, for example, but also I want to say again on energy and in many, many areas, water treatment, etc. And the fact is that for a massive deployment of those technologies that we have today, we need also the right frameworks. And this is why we need the work together between the private sector and the governments. And we need the financial instruments. I think that you're absolutely right. There is already a lot of innovation, but again, not deployed at scale and with the speed that is required. So I think that yes, I agree also we need to go away from the catastrophic view about, if you want to move to green, then it means that you're going to lose. There are lots of just amazing examples, even of global companies that have made just amazing benefits from moving into green. And just one question about the oil and gas sector. I have, since I came to this position, I have been engaging with the oil and gas sector, and I think this is absolutely necessary because we will not get to the transformation if we don't have them on board. I really believe that we have not yet had a serious and frank and honest conversation about it. I think that there is still a lot of information, data that is not clear. On the other hand, we also have, remember, there are many state-owned oil companies that influences also the positions of certain governments in the negotiations. For many countries, this continues to be also a very important issue for stability, social stability. And governments continue to move according to the political cycles. So if you put all of those components and try to come up with a kind of a framework for a solution, I think what we have achieved so far is quite remarkable. But this is not enough, and we need to accelerate.
Bill, let's put all of those questions to you since we're kind of reaching the wrap-up phase. So when it comes to the financial products that we have out there, are we using what we've got? Are we using debt financing? Are we going down the right path? Or are we still setting up challenges for ourselves down the road where we can, as was mentioned, really go for the low-hanging fruit? Do we look at business model changes, because there are other sectors, as being clearly pointed out, that are involved. We see some buying in, many still hanging out on the sidelines, waiting to see what happens. And then the question about, when do we stop transitioning and draw a line in the sand?
Yeah, and look, I was going to sort of try and take Pedro's question and Katie's question sort of together, because it gets to the heart, Maitri, of what you just said, which is, we have good ideas, we have good opportunities, we have some great innovation, and so then if you talk about barriers or the ability to scale, I mean, the truth of the matter is dollars are going to go sort of effectively on the path of least resistance. So some of the things that we need to do are to eliminate those barriers. And we don't have the time to get into them, but whether that's regulatory policy and the concept of, power purchase agreements, which, again, I think, Anne and Patricia are sort of well-versed in, whether that's tax policy and how easy is it to get sort of money in and out of a country, pay your fair share, but not be sort of totally unable to extract profits from a project that will send money elsewhere and risk we've talked about before. So I do think to both of those points, there are huge barriers there that we need to break down before the fluidity of this. Even if you have all the money, you've got to make it fluid and able to get there in as I said, the path of least resistance. In terms of transition, I mean, I can't talk to a specific company, but what I would say is this: the transition needs to be well thought out, and you mentioned Norway, and absolutely they are ahead of the curve, but that curve is going to grow. It's going to grow hopefully in an exponential way, and on that transition are going to go the most important energy companies in the world as part of their journey. And I do think that's a really important conversation to have and figure out sort of that time frame, because it's not 50 years from now, but it's not 5 months from now either. And so we got to figure out that balance. And then lastly, even though there's a conflict for me answering Andreas's question, because he's one of my fellow partners at KPMG, I will just say, we talk about the negatives, but he's absolutely right. There are so many enormous positives out there for innovative organizations, for capital organizations, and for citizens of the world. And we haven't really talked about the power of many with a few dollars in their hand, looking at purpose over financial return and the ability to innovatively finance projects with just that alone. You take many billions of people and have them make a contribution because they believe in purpose ahead of profit, and you've got some pretty sizable money in your hands. So I'll leave it at that, try to knit the three together.
Well, we've got just over 3.5 minutes to go before we close this session. So I want to end with last thoughts on those solutions as you hear the sirens go past. That has got to do something with the MSC, obviously. But if I can get you to give us a couple of ideas for solutions. We keep talking a lot about what holds us back. Solutions to getting sustainable finance in the hands that it needs to get to, putting aside all the challenges that we've talked about, getting the institutions involved. What is the incentive? And I feel like a broken record when I usually ask about incentives because it makes me sometimes go round and round in circles. So if I can get last thoughts from all three of you about solutions to the problems that we've been talking about. Can I start with you, Bill? Let's go backwards this time.
Yeah, no, look, I think this is really important. I think solutions have to come in, conversations that are going on right now at the MDBs and the development agencies around the world to recognize that they play a critical role in the contribution of private capital and public capital together. This whole notion of public-private partnerships. Don't underestimate the power of your people. We have 250,000 people around the world. They will not show up to work tomorrow if we don't actively and tangibly figure out how to help our clients and governments and NGOs around the world solve these challenges. So, you might think this is a sort of, this is a nice to have. This is not a nice to have for any business. This is a need to have, and the need to have is right now.
Anne?
You wouldn't think of it as a solution, but I want to put it forward anyhow, since we're speaking in the margins of the Munich Security Conference. The dynamic that I have witnessed in the last few weeks with this evolving security challenge, and in particular the Russia-Ukraine situation, is that Europe has understood that we are in a complete catch-22 situation. Europe derives 40% of its gas imports are from Russia. So if we use the gas imports as part of our sanctions regime vis-à-vis Russia, we essentially will shoot ourselves in the foot because we need that gas. If Russia unilaterally cuts off the gas to Europe, which it may very well do in a situation like that, we are in exactly the same situation. It has made us realize our extreme vulnerability based on the fact that we've been so slow in this transition. So that's why I'm saying, even if we don't think of it as a solution, let's use this crisis as an opportunity, because what I can tell you, I know all of the people who are in favor of the Green Deal, but I see for the first time those that are not so enthusiastic about the European Green Deal really listening and saying we need this energy transition, not only for climate, but also because we want to be less reliant on Russia. We want and we need energy security, and we need to be less subject to these volatile prices that exist in the fossil fuel sector and that have now driven up inflation to above 5%. This is hitting each and every one of us. So let's use this opportunity to really double down on the energy transition.
Last word, Patricia.
Well, I would say that we need to get an acknowledgement that investing in this transition, and I would say transformation, is really in a collective self-interest. It is not about helping others. It is not about doing something for a community far away. It is really about a self-interest. It brings the investment back home to your immediate environment. And yeah, I would fully agree also with Bill in the sense that we need to strengthen this work together between governments and the private sector in order to get the incentives, in order to get the right frameworks, in order to get the right policies.
Capital, at the end of the day, can actually make us more secure if it goes down the right road. Absolutely. Thank you very much to my panel. Please give them a round of applause for ending our day in such a positive note. I do want to say, if you want to connect and find out more about the sustainable finance programs of the BMW Foundation, feel free to connect with Dr. Heba Grieb. She is right in front. She's a member of the executive circle of the foundation. It's been a long day, so give yourselves a hand as well. You've sat through a lot of conversations. It's been thought-provoking, and it's now the very welcome time to head down to the bar, as Frank was promising earlier. It's 7 o'clock. We head down to the bar for a very, very exciting program. It's going to be, according to Kristen Van Aerten, an exciting program that's going to be also very, very inspiring, along with a few drinks. So head on down. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to let her announce exactly what she's going to be doing downstairs.